The opportunity to talk about Dad a little bit here. You're going to hear from Matt in a little while, and for those of you who haven't heard Matt read before, he really has a very, very unique and amazing way of expressing himself. I do not possess that ability any way whatsoever, but what I do have is an incredible memory. So anything that anybody has ever said or done, I remember it, and here it is, which is just enough motivation to make sure that I don't get to read about you at some point. So let me just start out by saying, guys, there could never be another Ron Bohm. Ron Bohm took me to the Cubs game on my 16th birthday. Ron Bohm had a Lexus convertible that no one else.
Alexa, off. Alexa, off. Okay, go.
Ron Bohm had a Lexus convertible that nobody else was allowed to drive. Kind of like a Ferris Bueller's Day Off sort of thing. Ron Bohm always used to call time out to remove his watch when you had him beat in a living room wrestling match. Ron Bohm got thrown out of multiple casinos for counting cards, winning tens of thousands of dollars, and yet could not beat any of his grandchildren in Monopoly. If you're wondering who started the food fight at the 1990 All-Star game at Wrigley Field, it was Ron Bohm. He swears it was Glenn Wilcox. I personally spoke to Glenn Wilcox, and I'm fairly confident it was Ron Bohm who threw the first crinkled hot dog wrapper. This is a true story. I don't know if you guys know this, but Dad attracted the attention of many, many young, attractive women. And I'm still trying to figure out if it was Mark or Brian that told him to use Stud Grandpa as his Skype ID name. Ron Bohm built a very successful business out of his home with nothing more than a computer and a phone. Think about that for a second. There were no assets, no inventory, no office, and no employees. Just a computer, a phone, and a revenue stream. Brilliant, huh? King Communications, or as I used to joke with him, Middleman Incorporated. But some of you probably don't know that King Communications wasn't Dad's first venture into the telecom world. Many of you, that's right, it was before. Many of you may not know that Dad was the head of his fraternity at MIT. And when he was there, this was back in the time where there was only one phone line that came into the frat house. And all of the engineers that lived in this frat house with him wanted their own extension. So of course, what happens when you put a bunch of MIT engineers in a need-to-getter? You get an illegal phone switch. But every room in the house had an extension. Well, at some point, as the house leader, Dad fired the cook. I don't know why. It's not relevant to the story, but he fired the cook. And in retaliation, the cook called the phone company and said this fraternity has an illegal phone switch in their frat house, and every room in the place has an extension. I don't know where the switch is, but it's somewhere in the house. So the phone company sent an inspector out to the house. And as soon as he showed up, Dad very calmly said, "Oh, give us just a second here." And in a stroke of good fortune, the younger sister of one of the Frous mates was actually visiting for the weekend. And he took one of the brothers, the younger sister, and said, "Look, I want you to go up into the room where the switch is, and if you hear us come anywhere near, start making a lot of noise like you guys haven't seen each other in a long time." The inspector did a complete, thorough, you know this story, don't you?
No, we don't.
The inspector did a complete search of the entire house, came to the last remaining room where the switch was, and Dad said, "You don't want to go in there." And the guy said, "Why?" And then all of a sudden, the screams of ecstasy started to come from the room. And Dad said, "See, these guys haven't seen each other in a long time. They haven't come out of this room all day." And the inspector contemplated his options and just said, "Thank you for your time," and left. The illegal phone switch was never found. Years later, when we took a tour of MIT and Dad showed us where the frat house was, Brian said, "Is this where all those nerds built that phone switch?" Dad was also an accomplished publisher. The Executive Guide to Video Teleconferencing was published in 1980. 20 years later, he received a single review from a reader named Jack. Jack called the book worthless and went on to say, "Do not purchase this book. It was a complete waste of time."
Are these jokes?
15 years later, he received his second review on the book. And this reader had a very different version of the book, calling the book visionary. This book was far ahead of its time. It is incredible to read such an accurate prediction and insights at a time when this technology didn't even exist. The author is visionary, and I'm sure he's done many great things in the field of communications. I highly recommend you read this book. Rachel, thank you for reading that book. Thank you.
You're welcome. I had to up those cards.
Thank you for the review. We really appreciate it. And if I know Rachel, she was sitting there saying, "I don't care what Jack thinks. I thought that was amazing." Fair enough? Dad was a wonderful, wonderful husband to Barbara and embraced many of the wonderful, wonderful traditions outside of the Jewish faith, including the Polish Christmas. In every family, there are certain roles everyone assumes, and unfortunately, in our family, Brian has assumed the role of the vodka shot pourer on Christmas Eve. And according to Polish tradition, you must drink shots in pairs. Apparently, the rationale is this is the only way you can be balanced. One Christmas, after not being able to keep up with Brian or Barbara's 75-year-old mother, Dad got really, really drunk. And it was at this point in time, out of nowhere, he had never given us any indication he ever wanted to do this, he started working on a Darth Vader imitation. And it sounded something like this. "Laura, I am your father-in-law." Prior to meeting Barbara, Dad crushed it as a single dad, especially in the kitchen. He knew how to prepare 2 meals. Chicken with lemon and oregano on the barbecue if we were good, and Harry's meatloaf if Matt and I were being punished. Just so you know, since there are new child protection laws, Harry's meatloaf is no longer commercially available.
Are these jokes?
These are true stories, Azalea, about your grandfather. When Matt was getting bar mitzvahed, the rabbi used an illustration saying that if you break a window playing baseball before your bar mitzvah, your dad pays for the window. If you break a window playing baseball after your bar mitzvah, you must pay for it because you are no longer a boy. And being Matt's younger brother, I couldn't help jump to his defense and said, "Rabbi Sherbel, Matt actually did break a window playing baseball before his bar mitzvah, and Dad still made him pay for it." Realizing that not only had Dad ruined his illustration, but I had basically just cross-examined him, rendering Dad guilty of being cheap in front of the entire congregation. In a moment of brilliance, the rabbi responded with a brilliant deflection, saying, "Well, in some families, Stu, it is necessary for training to take place." When exactly was this window broken? One year when I was living in the Northeast, a coworker and I were passing through Chicago on a supplier visit, and Dad and Barb graciously invited the coworker into their home for dinner. The coworker was an older woman with grown daughters. Dad and Barb prepared a fancy multi-course meal and also pulled out several bottles of wine as they connected with Paula as if they had known her for years. At the end of the night, as we were leaving, the coworker thanked them for the wonderful evening and then turned to my dad. Said, "Ron, I had all daughters, but I work with your son quite a bit, and if I had a son, I'd want him to be just like you." And a big smile came across Dad's face, and he said, "Paul, you work in supply chain. Make me an offer."
Dan.
Dad cared immensely for those he loved, and there were no shortage of safety tips to help protect you. Matt, if your wrist hurts, run around the block. Stu, you really shouldn't play hockey. You'll probably get hurt. Mark, before you change the water jug, let's check and make sure your back is okay. Brian, you really need to wear a ski helmet, so I bought you one. And by the way, I'm going to wear a big yellow jacket so you guys can see me anywhere on the ski slopes. Anytime there was a new medical revelation and it was in the newspaper, Dad made sure to communicate it to the family immediately. I think we were the first people to learn that oat bran would lower cholesterol, and we were all immediately fed oat bran immediately. There's one other safety tip, and I'll say this is probably the most significant one. And Brian, I apologize for bringing this one up now. But if that 12-pack of condoms in your room really does belong to Bill Madsen, we need to have his parents over to have a discussion right now. There could never be another Ron Bohm, but my dad was truly one of a kind. No one could have taken more care for his mom or his mother-in-law in their final years. Nobody could have cared more for his wife more than Dad did. Nobody could have defended his sons in any situation more than Dad did. Nobody welcomed 4 daughter-in-laws into the family quite the way that Dad did. And no one could have been more proud of the 10 granddaughters and 1 grandson than Dad was. While my parents' divorce put thousands of miles between Dad and I when I was 13, he made sure it was only a physical distance. My family's moved back to the Midwest 12 years ago, allowed us to make up for a lot of lost time. My 4 kids got to find out just how wonderful their grandfather was. I love you, Dad. I miss you, Dad, and we will always be connected. Thank you.
Good job.
I had to tell the Bill